Welcome to Wild Heart Revival, a gathering place for heartfelt conversations and stories as pathways of renewal and revival. I'm your host, Tay Tayari, and today's guest is Alena Natalia. In this grounding conversation, Alena shares her enriching experiences and insights from her journey through diverse natural, cultural, and spiritual landscapes, spanning from her childhood in Soviet Russia to her travels across 75 different countries. We explore how these experiences have shaped her understanding of healing, wandering, belonging, and the feminine mysteries. Alena's reflections on reclaiming our innate, unique gifts, healing our wounds, and reconnecting with our shared lineage of Earth offer a profound exploration of our intrinsic interdependence with the wild and its feminine essence. Alena is a teacher, initiated medicine woman, healer, and priestess to Earth and the deep feminine mysteries, who holds a vision of humanity reborn to its own sovereignty and magnificence, living in harmony with nature and the spirit in all things. Alena comes from an ancestral line of seers, healers, and mystics from North Africa, the Mediterranean, and Eastern Europe. Over 20 years, Alena's path has guided her to study Ashtanga Yoga and Shaktism, Tantra, shamanism, mysticism, feminine mysteries, and other ancestral medicine traditions from around the world. She continues to learn with great gratitude under her teacher and mentor, a curandera and shaman from the Andes Mountains of Peru. Alena has taught and facilitated internationally for over 10 years, bringing with her a vision of a humanity reawakened to its inherent magic, living in harmony with nature and spirit, in service to our personal and collective evolution. She offers mentorship containers, retreats and immersions, and individual healing sessions. You can learn more about her and her offerings on her website, which can be found in the show notes. If you're new to the show, you might like to know that I'm a counseling psychologist with an online practice dedicated to supporting wanderers, wanderers, and edgewalkers. If you're curious about how my personalized threshold counseling could benefit you, I invite you to schedule a free insight call. This is a wonderful opportunity for us to connect, explore our alignment, and see if we might walk alongside each other during a pivotal moment in your life. To learn more about my orientation to counsel, including the guiding themes of the threshold counseling that I offer, and to schedule your free insight call, visit coyotecouncil.earth. There is a direct link in the show notes. For more content, including other podcast episodes and my latest essays, follow that same link. You can also join the Monthly Musings newsletter for reflections, updates, and other creative endeavors by subscribing via the Connect page. And if you haven't already, consider subscribing to the show on your preferred podcast platform. Your likes, comments, ratings, and shares are also invaluable in supporting the growth of these heartfelt conversations and stories. Now, let us lay down some roots in this present moment together as we ground ourselves, open our hearts and our minds, and welcome our wonderful guest for today, Alena Natalia. So you say, my life has been a living and walking devotion to exploring and responding to the call of this great mystery of existence and the longings of the soul. I was shown early in childhood the path I was born to walk as earth and nature wove herself into my body, bones, dreams, and spirit. Beautifully written, by the way. And I'm very curious, and I'm sure anyone listening is as well, if you'd be willing to share what that early experience or those experiences were, or if not exactly what happened, maybe the themes that cause you to make this soulful claim at this time in your life?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And it's actually interesting because I feel like the journey of my life, especially as I've gotten older, I'm in my mid-30s now. Looking back, it was like suddenly a lot of things that you don't necessarily recognize them for what they are in that moment. In retrospect, years later, suddenly you look back at your life and you start to see that even from the beginning, there has been this organic tapestry weaving itself through
Mm,
your reality, and really just guiding you, and also trying to illuminate to you why you're here and who
mm,
you are, and what is it that has called your soul here to earth at this time. And as I got older and I was sort of looking back at my path and this journey I've taken, I was actually brought back even before could consciously say that I was choosing to be walking a path of seeking to understand the deeper nature of this reality. And it brought me back to my childhood.
mm,
And many people often ask me, they'll say, did you have a moment in your life where you like woke up, right? Or there was like a split? Because I think many people do have this experience where they're living life one way, and then at some point in their life, there's a crisis, or there's a realization, or there's an
mm,
opening, there's a spiritual experience. And then suddenly you pivot and you're suddenly walking your life in a more soulful way, in a more interconnected, authentic way. And I never had a moment like that. I feel like since childhood, and again, looking back at the earlier experiences of what my childhood felt like, since childhood, I feel like I've always known that, which is that intricate nature of our reality and my own place in that on a subtler
mm,
level, even if it wasn't made completely conscious yet. And it wasn't until I was about 14 when it was one summer. I don't even know what triggered it, but it was like suddenly I was surrounded by like these ancient women and this feminine energy and this sort of emanating goddess like feeling. And it was very soon after my first bleeding. And that was that first moment that actually triggered me to start seeking, right? And
mm,
so that was the beginning of my seeking. But before that, if I look back, I mean, what most people don't know about me is I grew up in Russia. Um, my father's a Russian American immigrant. My mother's a Spanish Moroccan Jew. So I come from sort of this mixed ancestry, but somehow we ended up back in Russia.
mm.
And so my childhood was very split between living in a Soviet apartment building in Moscow
Wow.
and coming coming to this place where I am right now in Western Massachusetts for the summers. And even while in this Soviet apartment building in Moscow, it was a very interesting time in Russia where everything was still very magical and raw. So like we would go into the forests and we would still be riding on horses with sleds through the forest. And my mom would take school through the snow in a little sled, right? And so there was already this sensation that I wasn't quite living in this modern world, I suppose, and that I was still kind of living in like this old world in Russia. And then when I was here in the United States, just completely surrounded by raw, wild nature. And so when I think about what I was like as a child, I was like a little fairy, like you couldn't get me out of the woods and the streams and like picking herbs and making potions, and just like that was all I wanted to do is just be in this wilderness,
Mm.
whether it was in Russia, in the forest there, or in the parks there, or in Massachusetts. And I just felt like my whole childhood was with fairies and mermaids and, woodland elves and trees and fields and streams and forests, and just talking to these things and listening to them. And then what's interesting is I had an extreme passion when I was that age, um, not just for like witches and fairies and all these mystical creatures, but I was also extremely passionate about ancient Egypt.
Wow.
To a point that when I was 9 years old, I taught myself hieroglyphics so I could read these scriptures.
Wow. Okay.
I set up in my closet in my bedroom a temple to Isis when I was like 9 years old.
Wow.
And I was writing all these hieroglyphics and I was making all these spells, and it was kind of bizarre, like, but when you're a child, you just think that this is normal, what you're living and what you're doing.
Right.
And again, it was only sort of much later when I was looking back that I was kind of like, oh, you were actually doing things that like you do now, but
Mm.
you were intuitively, right? And
Mm.
that's sort of the beauty of children and childhood. And when I work with people and when people are asking for help and support in terms of finding their soul's calling or their gift or their medicine for this lifetime,
Mm.
I very often invite them to go back and track through childhood and ask, what were you passionate about? Right? What were you doing? I was making like witches brews and casting spells and playing in
Mm.
the forest, and those are the things that really interested me. Because very often when we're a child, before we've been sort of pruned to fit into whatever society structures are there for us, our soul already knows why we're here.
Mm.
And in what
Mhm.
I call an intact society, um, an elder or a parent would be able to see that already emerging within a child, and they would already begin to cultivate it.
Mhm.
And unfortunately, in our reality now, we kind of have an opposite where things that are emerging organically within children that don't necessarily fit into the boxes of normal get clipped away.
Mm.
Um, and instead of encouraged. And so what we have is we have a lot of people who have these sort of what I would call organic gifts, which have to go through this long process sometimes in their lives of shedding a lot of things about themselves and about their realities that they thought were them or they thought were normal, and then
Mhm.
going through the process of reclaiming what is their truth and what is their gifts and what is their medicine, and being able to reclaim it courageously, even in a world that doesn't necessarily value it.
Mhm.
Um, so I think for me, it just became very clear from the beginning. I was always very intuitive. I was always very psychic. I always believed in a greater divinity. There was never a doubt in my mind.
Mm.
And I always, that was always what felt like home to me, right? I had a loving home and loving parents, but always like that world, that magical, mysterious world felt like where I came from and where I belonged. And so as I got older and I sort of consciously began seeking out what I would call an answer, right? I feel like when I had
Mm.
those when I was 14 years old, it was almost like a goddess coming to me and saying, okay, like, go find me now, right? Go find me in the world. And
Mhm.
so from then on, it was like I went everywhere. I studied Tibetan medicine, I studied herbal medicine, I studied Chinese medicine, not formally. I studied Wicca and paganism. Even in university, I was looking at all of these different ways of understanding and distilling truth from reality. I traveled the world. I've been to 75 countries, and many of those places were me going, trying to find like masters in a mountain who could tell me about the essence of the meaning of this reality.
Mm.
And I spent most of my 20s doing that, primarily in India, Nicaragua, and Peru. And so I think I sort of came to a culmination at a certain point in my journey where I feel like I made a full circle back to that moment in the field with the goddess and the priestesses. And it was just sort of this homecoming to this understanding of this deeper feminine nature of reality, which is a, where we are right now as humans on earth. We're sort of in this moment where that is ready to be reborn,
Mm.
integrated back into our reality.
Mm.
And so I just feel like my entire life has been, you know, in almost an obsessive devotion to this, and for many years not even knowing what this is, just continuing to look for it in every little place that I could find, in
Mm.
different traditions and different teachers and different teachings. And yeah, so it sort of brought me to where I am now. And I always say to people, you know, I've learned from many beautiful lineages and traditions. I've been initiated into lineages and traditions, and yet I choose to not teach those things or necessarily share those things because I think, you know, we're in this sort of interesting time as humanity on Earth where the structures of the past that have sustained us are beginning to sort of shift and dissolve a little bit.
Mm.
We're being called into our own sovereignty and our own embodied knowing, and that we're being called back to earth, and we're being called back to earth in a way that is going to reconnect us to our truest, deepest nature. And I find that so much more important than knowing how to like wave a feather in the traditions of the Peruvian Andes,
Mm.
right? So and
Mm.
that's devotion, right? My devotion is to each soul, right? Can I, you know, whomever feels called to this work or this path, can I be of service to supporting to guide you back, right, to that original knowing or that organic knowing of our interconnectedness with this web of life and what I would call sort of this deep feminine reality,
Mm.
this organic reality which really holds us and nourishes us. And yeah, and it's kind of funny because you know you gave me that quote I wrote, and it's like, again, I'm 35 and I'm looking back now and I'm like, I this was always the reality to me all along. I always knew this, right,
Mm.
from the
Mm.
beginning. And so I feel like I've made sort of this beautiful, you know, full circle within myself, um in my journey. And yeah, and so if I could culminate it, I suppose, yeah, since a child, this is just what I've walked and what I've been in deepest devotion to, even without consciously knowing it.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Oh, thank you for all of that. Beautiful. Sounds like such a wandering, epic, and soulful journey that you have had since a young age. That you've been between very interesting and contrasting worlds for most of your life, which which is very interesting, you know, because a lot of people don't have that. And it's you're talking about how um, lineage can be impactful and important at certain times, and especially for certain people. But I also saw that you wrote somewhere, you said lineage is a path, but it is not the answer. It is not
Mhm.
the answer to the perennial questions: why we are, who we are, what is our greatest potential. Later on, you say, so many of us seek to belong to a path, a practice, a shape, but we forget to belong to ourselves, to the earth, to our ancestors, to the weave of life that brought us here. We all belong to the lineage of earth. And I think that that's incredibly important to speak to over and over again at this time when, of course, the earth is suffering in many ways,
Mhm.
dying in different ways, and that it's certainly caused by the denial of that lineage, the forgetting of that lineage, that
Mm-hmm.
understanding that we are earth children, and underneath and beyond any human construct, idea, form, or structure, the
Mm-hmm.
earth is there patiently and incessantly creating and inspiring and enlivening and ensouling the infinite, intricate processes of this beautiful planet that we
Mm-hmm.
call. So I'd be curious to hear you talk a little bit more about that. What does it mean to belong to the lineage of Earth?
Um, yeah, thanks for bringing it up. That's a really important point and a really good question. And my discussing this point is, I could talk about it for a long time. It's very multi-layered, and I'm sure you can.
Yeah, I understand.
I think, like, yeah, there's so many different dimensions of it. It's sort of difficult to know even where to begin. But
Right.
to your question, what does it mean to belong to the lineage of Earth? It's really just that simple, right? And that's kind of what that truth is and what truth tends to be. It tends to be just very simple. And
Mm,
I think humans, sometimes we try to overcomplicate things.
mm,
And
mhm,
the simplicity of the reality is we are organic biological beings that are not just biological from a scientific perspective, but also we are cosmological, right? In the sense of we are a biology that's also influenced by the cosmos and the stars, the planets, the sun, the moon, right? So we're not just an earth-based biology, we're a cosmic-based biology. And that's our starting point,
mm,
right? And let's go back to the moment of birth. When we're born, one of the first sensations we feel is we feel for the first time gravity.
mm,
And the gravity of our physical form on this earth is our first anchor into this reality,
mm,
right? This is my anchor point. This is where I land in this gravity, in this biological body that's been woven by all of these incredible forces around me, whether it's by the elements, by the cosmic forces, right? And even the astrologies, right? The astrologies imprint us with certain energetics that help us and guide us and define our lives for our entire lives. And so that's that initial landing point. That's where we really begin. And unfortunately, we as humans, generally speaking, we've sort of even backtracked from point one, right? Which is the gravity of my physical embodiment on this earth and what that means.
mm, mm,
And we've backtracked to a point where most of us aren't even conscious really fully of that reality, right? We're sort of what I would call disembodied or uprooted. And I could talk, a lot about the collective consciousness history of the last thousands of years that has sort of brought us to this place of a disembodied spirituality, where we've relied on sort of a more masculine energetic of spiritual pursuit, meaning structures, lineages, ascension, transcendence, going up and out, um, dissolution, escaping cyclical reality. We live in a cyclical reality. That's the reality of this earth, right?
mm,
And
mhm,
our bodies. We're in constant cycles every single day. And even our life is one big cycle, right? We're born, we mature, and then we die. And so, because we've lived in sort of this more masculine dominant spiritual pursuit, it's like we've forgotten that first point, right? That first step on the spiritual path is actually, I'm here alive now on earth in this body, interconnected to all of the powers that are around me, right? And even like doesn't have to be complicated. We're not even like in the realm of gods and goddesses powers. It's like the earth beneath my feet, the air, the wind, the waters, the sun, the moon, right? All of these elements that are constantly working with us to allow us to be alive. That's the first point. That is the first point of reality. And so what has been my personal experience and what I've observed is I've worked with many people over the last 10 to 15 years, and I find that people are always looking for something that is actually outside of where they currently are. And that's where they begin. When the reality is all of those spiritual paths and lineages and teachings that are out there that are extremely valuable, that can be extremely valuable for us, are not completely going to give us what we are looking for if we can't first be here. Quite the contrary, what they can tend to do is take us even further out of this ultimate reality and truth for us, which is I'm an embodied cosmic biological being on this earth made up of these extraordinary powers that have co-created this miracle of my life. And so I believe that one of our deepest wounds as present day humans is, and this is connected to that we have forgotten our lineage of earth, is we have forgotten our belonging. Right? And so belonging is an inherent intrinsic birthright to just being born, right? By the sheer fact that I'm alive, it means I belong here. And yet there has been a lot of programs that have been put into place and conditionings over the last 1,000 years or so that have taught us that actually belonging or even salvation, right, is conditional. It's unconditional. And so what we're suddenly faced with is this deep and unconscious pattern of trying to always win a father's love, right, that we can never quite get to in order to have those innate human needs met, instead of just remembering that by the sheer fact of our birth, we are unconditionally loved by a mother's love. Right? That doesn't have to be won. It doesn't have to be acted upon. It just is. And I find that when I'm working with people and I can guide them back into that space where I'm actually, oh my God, I can actually just rest in this mother's love. I don't have to do anything anymore, right? Because so much of our programming comes from, I need to belong, I need to look a certain way, I need to act a certain way, I need to do certain things. And so what I find can happen is that wound of not belonging starts to get projected onto our spiritual seeking. So many people will begin looking for a sense of belonging in cultures and lineages that are more intact, perhaps spiritually, than their own. And that's where they will seek their belonging in. But what gets overlooked, actually, very often is themselves. Right? They will abandon their own ancestors, their own land, their own places of coming from, their own families, their own cultures, their own heritage, their own spiritual practices, to try to find themselves in something else that's outside of them. And so what I think is one of the most important points that we need to always remember, and especially as we're beginning to shift from a male-dominated collective consciousness to a more balanced feminine collective consciousness, is everything is within us. And until we remember this, and until we remember how to access it and trust me, Alena, here and now, interconnected to this reality, the cosmos, the elements, and this place of life, which is me in my lineage of earth, until we can remember this, everything else is going to be almost a distraction from that first step, that first point of gravity. And the lineage of Earth is also the oldest lineage that humans have ever had. We are all from the lineage of Earth. Our earliest ancestors were doing just that. They were fixating themselves and understanding who and what they were in this, in cosmic space and time, through their relationship to their physical bodies and the elements and the earth and the stars. And so that's where we all come from.
Mm.
And it's important to also, I'm going to speak to this as well for just one moment. There's also a strange misconception going on right now in people's minds that only people who come from more intact cultures or of darker skin colors or from certain parts of the world have indigenous roots. And this is really also important to debunk, right? It's a myth.
Mm.
They are closer to their indigenous roots in cosmic space and time.
Mm.
But all of us come from indigenous people. We are all indigenous to Earth. We all belong to this
Mm.
lineage and this wisdom and this mother love of Earth. And until we can remember that, we're never going to really fully heal that wound. And we're going to keep looking for that satisfaction or that meaningfulness in different places or identities or structures or other things. And we'll sort of just miss out on that beautiful opportunity of, who am I?
Mm.
Why am I here? What is my truth? If I am a keystone in this cosmic web of life, what is my keystone? What is my purpose? How am I offering something to sustain this cosmic and eco evolution? So I think that touches on a lot of answers to that question.
Absolutely. I'm really glad you brought up that topic of indigeneity, because I think something that many people are suffering from, that is a very real force in collective humanity at this time, is this experience of displacement,
Hmm?
that by the nature of how things have gone in recent centuries, most people at this time on Earth are displaced, in the sense that many people are living on lands that their parents maybe didn't even grow up on or within, um, that lands that were stolen from people who had been with those lands for many generations. And so then it does cause many of us to have this longing for a deeper sense of indigeneity, a deeper connection to place and landscape and the spirits and gods that reside therein. And also, what you're speaking to is, but there is a deeper indigeneity inherent in all of us, that
Mm-hmm.
because we are of Earth, and we, no matter where we are within Earth, we are of Earth, that indigeneity lies beneath everything, and that's important to remember and awaken, enliven, and ensoul.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to go a little bit deeper into that. How how have you, or how might people that you've worked with begin to explore the edges of that? If someone doesn't have a sense of indigeneity in the place that they live, and living in a city, it becomes, I mean, very, very difficult to have that sense,
Totally.
because it's so hyper
Remove.
focused on the human, right? Yeah. So how do people begin to really tend to that deep indigeneity that's within?
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. So I would say that when people can begin to reclaim that indigenous within them, right, which is my inherent connection to earth and cosmos and nature, it's actually going to begin to heal that greater collective wound, because history for the last thousands of years has been a long story of removing people from the lands they live on and bringing in new people to live on those lands. And so we have a long, complex history of displacement and uprootedness, right? From, the ways my ancestral lineage is especially complicated. My father is from Russia, so that's a little easier, but my mother's family is Jewish, and they've wandered all through the Middle East and North Africa and Southern Europe. And so, that idea of being able to reconnect to an ancestral land can be quite complex, right? And I think especially with, the understanding that all land has experienced the pain of relationship and then loss and then re-relationship to humans. So all of the land, all of nature wants to be in a nourishing and co-creative and active relationship with humans. And the land feels pain when, somebody else comes in and commits a violence and removes that humanity which they've been in relationship with, because the land cares about us. Actually, this is another myth that's out there that drives me nuts, that humans are a cancer on the earth and earth hates to be rid of us. That's not true at all. Right? Earth loves us and wants to be in relationship to us, and is in pain when it loses us, in that same way that when we lose our relationship to her. And so I think we start to get distracted when we begin to nitpick about, where my land is and your land is and whose land is here and where do I come from and where do you come from, right? And I think that that can be helpful in some instances of being able to support people who are currently feeling pain. But I think ultimately it's quite simple. How do you relate every single day to the elemental earth and cosmic reality around you, no matter where you live, right? So, and again, when it comes back to ancestral land, you can be in relationship with your ancestral land without ever having set foot on it. And that's a very powerful thing to be able to initiate and welcome back into your life, because when we reconnect in relationship to our ancestral land, we unlock and we open up, you can call it like a lineage of almost like DNA codes that become accessible to us, of all of the wisdom and the magic that lives in the lineage and the blood and the bones and the memory of our ancestors back to our very first ancestors. We can also unlock ancestral trauma, but I feel like that's this big. Our ancestral trauma is this big compared to the magic and beauty within all of our ancestral lineages. And a beautiful way to access that is, how do I reconnect to my ancestral land? Do I meditate on it? Do I make just gentle offerings to it? Do I speak to it? Do I envision it? Do I have a photo of it? Right? Any way that we can begin inviting that energy back into our lives in relationship, and it will begin to guide us and it will begin to open things for us and within us, maybe very subtly at first, but it's there. But then where are you right now? Right? How are you living in relationship to where you are right now? And so it's like, look out the window, observe what's there, right? Listen to the land. And especially in a country like Guatemala, where you are, or Nicaragua, where I live, where neither of us are from those lands, there's going to be a very different kind of listening and observation that happens. in the beginning before we're able to really begin to properly receive that relationship and step into that relationship with the land.
Mm.
So when people ask me how can I connect to my indigeneity, right? My way of connecting to nature and the land that's authentic to me, go outside. Like, it's so simple. Sit in front of a stream, turn your phone off.
Yeah.
Like, listen, watch how the sunlight glitters on the water. Like, there's something there for you. Watch how the wind moves the leaves in a tree. There's something there for you. Listen to the birds, listen to the crickets, right? There's always an intelligence there that is encoded with the greater intelligence of this universe, and it's right in front of us.
Mm.
And we are encoded with the ability to receive and understand and activate those intelligences within us because we are nature and we're a part of nature, right? This is the original religion. It's the lineage of Earth. That is
Mm.
how humans came up with spiritual practice, through their own raw, real, wild relationship to the nature around them.
Mhm.
And that's that step one. That's that first step. How do I feel and experience myself in the gravity of my physical form on this earth in relationship? Nothing can happen, really, truly, fully happen until we've really felt that point.
Mm.
And even people who live in a city, the elements are always present. Go outside, look at the sun, right? Look at the moon, look at the stars, even through the buildings. I went to university in New York City, and I was always walking and I was like looking between the buildings to try to see the sun and the sky,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And it's there, have some, light a candle. That's the flame. Put a little bowl of water, have some plants in your house, right? It's like, and spend time. And I think that, when people are asking me, like, how can I cultivate this relationship back again with nature? And again, if people love to overcomplicate things, it's not complicated. How would you cultivate a friendship with a person? Right? It's the same idea. Thank you for coming over. How are you?
Yeah.
I made cookies, right? I bought you these flowers. Thank you for listening to me. Thank you. I have a conflict. Can I share this with you? And can you impart wisdom on me? It's opening up that conversation and that reciprocity. And I think the most important thing I can say towards that is our capacity for being in that kind of relationship and for being in love in that sense is, what is our capacity for the depth and the quality of our presence and our intention and our attention, right?
Mm.
So we're meeting, trying to rekindle this relationship. My side of it is the depth and the quality of my presence, my intention, and my attention when it comes to meeting with these beings. They're really just beings. And so that's it. It's very simple, right? If you can put your phone down, if you could like get in your body, take a few deep breaths, and then open your eyes and just be still and present with what is, whether you're sitting in a field or you're sitting in your house with a house plant, it doesn't matter. Right? And just creating that spaciousness for presence. That's love, right?
Mm.
That's really the action of love. The action of love is our capacity for presence and attention with intention.
Mm. Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. The root word of religion is, it actually means to reconnect. And I've been reminding people of that lately, and myself, because of course we can see how misconstrued all the ideas and concepts and structures have become that have um, meandered away from that original root. meaning that we, when we say religion or think about religion, oftentimes, at least from my experience and many people I've talked to, there's this sense of disconnection in many ways. We can think of all the atrocities that have occurred and so on and so forth in the name of religion. And so to reclaim that understanding of reconnection is to reclaim a religion of life. And I do
Mm-hmm.
think that that's what the earth is calling many of us to, is to reclaim this deep orientation that's inherent inside of the human to connect with life in complex and non-rational, deeply meaningful, and vitally important and essential ways.
Yep.
Yeah. Um, I want to bring up something that I was reminded of while I was listening to you there. I read this article, forget who wrote it, but she was discussing, and this was written in the 90s, but she was discussing the movement at that time, and as we know is still alive, of this awakening to the the essence of the goddess,
Mm-hmm.
and that there's been many women who have been taking up this call to reawaken the connection and understanding of what the goddess is, within and without. But what she was talking about in that article was, she was saying, we as she was a woman, she said, saying to the something to the effect of, we as women need to be careful with this too, though, because by claiming this power so strongly and taking it all on as our responsibility, we might be putting ourselves in a place of imbalance in connection to more masculine forces, and of course, maybe to men as well. And that there needs to be this delicate balancing as we reawaken this connection to what we know as goddess, or what we're coming to know as goddess, that there needs to be a sensitivity to that,
Mm-hmm.
that we don't put all the weight on our shoulders, and that we don't think that we need to save the world, so to say, through
Mm-hmm.
this. So I'm curious to know what comes up for you
That's
in
a
that,
great question. Again, I feel like I could respond with so many things or say
as it
there's
is, as it is. Yeah.
so I would say on a more superficial or surface layer, when we look at reclaiming of feminine power and the goddess as it translates into modern day feminism, I would say there is an inversion there of a deeper truth, or an extraction of a deeper truth to create sort of a form or function that serves society or culture in this moment, but it's not actually the substance. And we live in that reality right now. We live in an inverted reality where, as you said, world religions all come from connection and they come from a truth, but they have been extracted and distorted into these structures to serve certain societal or cultural needs at that time or at this time, right? And so I think the biggest thing I need to say towards that is the feminine, right? And we can say the goddess is the divinity that encapsulates the feminine. The feminine holds all, which means the feminine encapsulates all of duality, right? And this is where you have something like let's take Christianity because it's an easy example that segregates reality into this is good and this is bad,
Mhm.
right? Light and this is dark, this is heaven, this is hell. We reject that dark, nasty stuff and we only will focus on this stuff, right? Which creates so many problems. I won't go into it, but
Yeah,
essentially what we've done is we've rejected a whole half of reality,
yeah.
right? We're definitely seeing culturally what happens when we do that. And then, that connects into the suppression of the feminine, which also creates something like political feminism, right? So the feminine encapsulates all of reality. Everything belongs within the realm of the feminine with no judgment. Everything belongs, right? And this is, again, a part of healing that core belonging wound, right?
Yeah.
That we think that the bad parts of us can't belong, but the bad parts of us belong. All of it belongs here. Within that is the reality of duality, right? Where we do have good things, right? We have virtues and we have truths. And then we have not so good things, things that cause pain or things that are, inherently evil, right? And then we have duality in the sense that we understand it on an earth-based or cosmic level, which is we have light or dark, right? We have underworld and we have upper worlds. We have hells and heavens. We have feminine, we have masculine. We have winter, we have summer. We have menstruation, we have ovulation. We have birth, we have death. Everything in this reality that we live in, and I cannot speak for other universes because I've not been there. This one's enough for one lifetime, I think, to try to understand. We live in this constant cycling of duality. And if these dualities are not in balance, it means that we're not going to have a crop next year, right? Or we're going to have cancer because our death programming in our cells switched off because we're not allowing that side of the duality to fully function or have space in our reality. So we start to find ourselves in all of these imbalances when we're not allowing for both dualities to constantly be cycling and relating with one another. And we are coming out of a very severe, very old imbalance between dualities where we've lived. I'm just laughing because I feel like it's more than an imbalance. It's actually, I feel like we've been living in like an alternate reality to the reality. And we're moving from a hyper masculine consciousness and reality back towards a reality that is governed by the feminine forces of life and death, creation and destruction, and those exact dualities, which include a feminine and a masculine feminine, right? So just to quickly summarize that, and this is from a lot of as well the indigenous traditions I've learned within indigenous, so like the Peruvian ones and also the Tantra lineage I learned from in India. The understanding of the cosmovision itself is feminine by nature, and within that we have a masculine polarity and a feminine polarity or duality that are always creating this reality. So it's sort of like how a woman has a menstrual cycle and ovulation is a more masculine energy and menstruation is a more feminine energy, but within the cycle itself is feminine. Right? So to more clearly answer your specific question, I don't actually think that we're going to find ourselves in a place where organically, right? I don't think we're organically going to find ourselves in a place where we draw things out of balance in the other direction, where we pull ourselves so far into the feminine that we lose sight of the masculine. What always happens during these times of transition and chaos and turbulence and big energies moving on Earth is you're going to have people who play out their wounding. And so what I do see is a lot of women who say that they live in devotion to the feminine, but like you said, they might have an unconscious hatred towards the masculine, right? Or they might, and there's nothing wrong with being single forever, but they might want to have a partnership, but cannot find a partnership because there's something within that wounding towards the masculine, and that really heavy dosing of a reactionary feminine that is actually blocking them from being able to organically allow for both of those energies to move within them and move within their lives. So I think we're coming to an interesting time on Earth where I would say everything from, like, let's say 10,000 years and before that was more matriarchal or more of a feminine consciousness. Everything from 10,000 years ago to now moved towards a hyper-masculine consciousness. And as was envisioned by Jesus and Magdalene, we're stepping into an age of union where we're actually stepping into an age on Earth where the consciousness of humanity is moving into a divine union of those two dualities of masculine and feminine. So that means that we are moving towards a place of resurrecting the feminine, and in a way that is going to be the divine lover and the healer. First, we have to be the healer of the masculine. And so that masculine can come and be that divine counterpart to that feminine. And that is where this divine creation of this new age of consciousness for humanity will supposedly emerge. I think, like I said, there's a lot of women who still carry the pain, and a lot of their diving into realms of feminine are reactionary to that pain. And I think that any sort of reactionary thing to the pain only just perpetuates the pain or the imbalance in the first place. I think women, I think generally, because we're in this age where the feminine, the divine feminine is awakening, I think a lot of women are hearing her call. And I think even the women who feel like feminism or, reacting to the pain of men or patriarchy is where their path is calling them forth from. It's all a part of this journey of moving in a different direction, right? And, healing the pain and shifting the balance. And it's always going to be chaotic, right? I think the most important thing that I would say towards that is, it's sort of a bigger picture, which is, I feel like humanity currently is at this crossroad, right? Where we have this sort of artificial world that we've created. And then we have an organic world, which is, we've sort of moved away from, but is really calling us back to remember it. And the thing is, the feminine is the basis of the organic world, because the feminine is the energy that creates life and recycles life into new life. It is inherently evolutionary. And we just need to remember who we are. Right? Am I an organic being of nature, or am I the machine? And there's been a lot of conditioning around removing humans from their organic nature and knowing of who they are in order to direct them towards this path of the machine, which is anti-life. It's inorganic, and therefore will ultimately be a demise for everything, right? And so I think that regardless of how the feminine is awakening, it's a part of this process that we're in right now. And it's very important because it is the guiding light towards remembering our organic life and the organic timeline that it's beckoning us to remember. And that's the feminine to me, right? The feminine is that which creates, that which evolves, that which transforms. And so, however people want to relate to it, I'm not going to judge it. And there's definitely things, like I said, that are more reactionary, and there's others that are more true to the source. But yeah, personally, this is why I do the work I do, and in service to that feminine and life is, we got to go that way, or else we're not going to be going any way for much longer.
Yeah.
You know, I think a lot of women are just hearing that, especially as embodied women, it arises through our physical body, maybe more palpably than it would through somebody embodied in a male body.
Yeah. Wow. Thank you for sharing all that. As you were speaking, there's these incredibly vibrant green, blue, orange, purple lizards on my windowsill, chasing each other back and forth in the sunlight, shining in my eyes. It's so, there,
Amazing.
there she is. Yeah.
Trying to find their balance,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Um, let's talk about let's talk about wounds a little bit more.
Hmm.
You brought up that word a couple times, the wound of belonging. You
Hmm.
also brought it up in talking about these reactionary ways of modes of being that come from that stem from wounds that are maybe unhealed. You also mentioned at the beginning of our conversation how looking back over your younger years can help you identify what your gifts are. Certainly what your passions were, what you were naturally drawn to, what brought you to life, what plunged you into the timelessness of flow and aliveness.
Hmm.
I would say, and I wonder if you agree, that I think looking back over our younger years and seeing also where our wounds lie
Hmm.
and the nature of those wounds at this time are probably, if not as important, almost as important as being able to discern what our natural propensities were. And
Hmm.
it's the melding of the gifts and the wounds that help us really bring to life our soul's path. And
Absolutely.
yeah, so could you share your understanding of that? And as all the questions, of course, it's massive. And so, because the story really has any end or beginning when you really look into it, let's just jump into the middle at some point.
Well, I think if I was to give like a very blanket definition of what is a wound, right? I would say, um, first of all, the first thing is a wound is something that has pulled us sort of out of harmony with the greater whole. So there's something vibrating that is of a disharmonious energy or a stuck energy, right? That is not vibrating in sort of not just alignment with the greatest whole that is our ecosystem, but the greater cosmic ecosystem.
Mm,
And before I get into how everybody is like, well, that's my bad side, and then this is my good side, right? Because that's that same conditioning. And
mhm,
remember, we're of the feminine, where everything belongs here, everything has a purpose, and we're going to love everything no matter what. And that's would be my second definition of a wound, which is a wound is a messenger of love, right?
mhm.
And the messenger of love calling us back into harmony.
I love
So
that.
not like an evil little minion that's trying to ruin your life and your relationships and blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
It is there vibrating at something which is not in harmony with the greater whole as a cry for your love and attention to guide you back to that source, right? And so I love what you said about tying it into our childhood. And yes, that's another question that I often ask people, which is what are the things that really hurt you when you were a child, right? Where did you feel pain? What was that passion or that anger, right, that you felt growing up about things in the world? It doesn't even have to be personal.
Mm,
And um, for me, what always like got me going and still gets me going, but from day one, was any environmental destruction, any pain on animals, and any injustices towards women.
mm,
These were the three things that just always got me going, which was, the earth, the animals, and women when
mm,
I was. And um that was obviously a clear arrow pointing me in the directions of where I was destined to be focusing my work, right? And so I think also when we're talking about wounds, we need to understand that wounds are not just like, my mom didn't give me the attention that I needed. And so now I have all of these patterns of behavior, which is how I try to sort of manipulate my reality to feel safe and loved and seen and validated and belonging, right? So there's that layer of wounding. But wounding is also greater than just us, right? Wounding is, I carry energetic wounds, my lineage carries energetic wounds, my bigger level of my people carry energetic wounds, my generation carries energetic wounds, my soul carries energetic wounds, right? And we can just go on and on and on forever.
Mm.
And I just want to say about this, because I encounter these people quite a bit who are, they're like, they're constantly digging more into the shadow work to find more and more and more and more wounds. And I'm just going to make it clear, it's infinite wounding and
It
suffering.
never ends.
It never ends. You are not here to do all of it.
Yes.
And you if you look, you will find. That's all I have to say, right?
Yeah.
You will always find something. And when we get so tied up in that wounding, we sometimes just forget to live. We forget to actually act. We forget to utilize and activate our gifts because we think, oh, if I go a layer deeper into my shame, then I'm going to be able to like show up better in my relationships, or I'm going to find a partner, or I'm going to manifest $1 million, right? And so, like I said, humans like to make things complicated, and sometimes they're just simple, right?
Mm.
I have found that humans have an extraordinary capacity that other beings that are alive don't necessarily have this in the same degree, which is the extraordinary power of our consciousness. And this is why certain spiritual teachings and paths, such as yoga, are so fixated on sharpening the mind and the capacity for consciousness, because they understood how powerful humans are when they can clear the junk and actually chisel that mind and that consciousness into a laser beam.
Mm.
Very often what I've, and it surprises even me, honestly, but in my work over the years, I've found the most powerful tool towards healing and meeting our wounds is to simply bring the light of our consciousness to it and to see it and feel it, because it will always show us what we need to know in this moment in time, right? Sometimes it's not relevant. I've met wounds that I could not have met when I was 20,
Mm-hmm.
and I met them when I was 30.
Yeah.
Maybe of the same patterning, right? But like, we need to trust in life's organic evolution and journey for us, and that we don't need to go digging forever and ever to find the wounds and uncover the wounds and da 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 da. And that we can just trust that when we're aligned with this path and this flow of life, when a wound is ready, when the time is right, it'll start showing up, right? And it will show up in how we react in relationships, how we feel, maybe a physical ailment. It can show up in so many different ways. And so I found that when we're able to sort of drop our control of things and just shine that unconditional light of our awareness into the place where we are wounded, it knows how to alchemize itself. It wants to alchemize itself, because we are nature, and nature's always seeking its highest realization and evolution. And when we allow ourselves to be in that nature and use our humanness to support that nature, that's the most powerful healing tool that we all have. And it will find its own way towards alchemy. right? Towards reharmonizing back to that greater vibration.
Mm.
And, you know, where wounding gets difficult, and, you know, this is, we need to absolutely do a good layer of shadow work when we're walking on a spiritual path. Not even then, all humans should do a healthy layer of shadow work so that we could really be living in our highest potential, right?
Mm.
We're born with wounds, we accumulate wounds in our life. And like I said, they're messengers guiding us into our highest realization and possibilities. I think it gets tricky when people can no longer discern when they are living from their wounds and when they're living from truth.
Mm.
And
Mm.
when we're living from our wounds, we cannot be living from truth because truth is neutral and wounds and truth flows. And wounds are, they're almost like an alternative reality, right? They're a constricted energy that is not in that flow of truth or life moving towards its own self-realization. It's something that needs to be, like I said, reharmonized back. And that's when, you know, you get, unfortunately, and again, like I said before, we live in this time of kind of confusion and turbulence and inverted realities and chaos and extracted truths and distorted truths and all of these things. But, you know, this is when you get people who are seeking something or doing something which their intention is in the right place, but it's not coming from their own knowing of themselves. It's coming from a wounded place, which is why, like I said, we're, you know, that wound of not belonging is driving many people to look for themselves in lineages and focus on identifying with that lineage instead of actually sitting with themselves.
Mm.
It is amazing to me. It will never not be amazing to me how far people will go to avoid just sitting with themselves.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Right. And so, you know, and then you have these bigger wounds, like the wounds of, you know, what some could call patriarchy or a very suppressive, hypermasculine consciousness. And, you know, and you'll have women, like we said, who will dive headfirst into the anti, right?
Mm.
Because it's a reaction to the wound.
Mm.
And it's just, it's very important to understand that when we are acting from a wounded place, we are perpetuating the wound. We're not actually healing. And this is why I'm not very popular whenever I say this, but I'm always very skeptical of social justice movements because they're often rooted in a wound. And there's a lot of energy being placed into the perpetuation of the wound because the wound is the story. And we need the story to continue our cause. And so what happens is we spend our whole lives stuck in a story that we just keep telling ourselves about our wounds, about a cause, about somebody else's wounds. And we begin to just live in this perpetual existence of victimhood and in service of powerlessness instead of in service of power.
Mm. Mhm.
And yeah, so I could say so much about wounds. And I think, you know, what I say to the women I work with very often is, you know, your body will never lie to you. It doesn't have a brain. It has like a cosmic intelligence and earth intelligence encoded into it, right? It doesn't have a thinking mind that's always going to try to confuse you or,
Mm.
you know, throw you off track. I say, when you're choosing something or when you're about to take action, like just sit with yourself and ask, is this coming from a place of love and truth, or is this coming from a place of fear and pain?
Mhm.
Because that's how you're really going to begin to start shifting these patterns within your life.
Mhm.
Right? Healing wounds. I hate to break it to all the people, and I used to be one of these people who thought this, was waving feathers and magical things around, and it's gone. That's not the nature of this reality, right? It's just like how I can't destroy matter. You can only transform things, and you can only really transform things if the person who's holding the thing wants to transform it.
Mm.
And I've met so many people who come to me again and again with the same back injury or something, and they've gone to all these shamans and healers, and I will say the same thing to them. Are you ready to just sit and listen to the pain? Or are you going to give it your responsibility for the healing to somebody else to do for you? Because they might take it away for a minute, but until you do the work, because you are a sovereign being, this is super important. And again, a whole other chapter of the work I do. You are a sovereign being. You need to choose it first and take that responsibility. And that's the only way that somebody like me or these other people are really going to be able to give you long lasting, sustainable healing.
Yeah. Yeah. Even in the transformation of the wound, that transformation necessarily carries the signature of that wound. So that sense of waving it away, feathering it away, or whatever, doing the magical incantation that disperses it, that doesn't happen because that signature will always be there. It just changes. It's informed by the original signature. And then that's important, that's part of the gift of it, that you carry that signature forth into whatever transformation is that you're able to muster or that occurs naturally. You reminded me while you're speaking there of Nelson Mandela. I heard recently when he was eventually let out of prison in South Africa, that he had been in there for decades, I believe. He, of course, could have had, for sure, had wounds around that, pain around that of being held prisoner for many, many years of his life, and for what we would see as being unjust causes. He could have came out and been really angry and been living from his wounds, as you say, but he didn't. And even when he had the opportunity to speak to the people who had imprisoned him for all those years, he had the opportunity to lay into them with his anger and his rage that was undoubtedly there in some form. But rather, what he did is he actually spoke to the beauty of those people. He spoke to the good things that they've done.
Mm-hmm.
He
Yeah.
spoke at length of all that came of those years and their governing and what's and whatnot, that ended up actually being good and beautiful and constructive.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this sense of, I heard this said recently too, hallelujah anyway.
Yeah.
It's like whatever wounds happened, that if you can see them as being gifts and praise hallelujah anyway, and
Mm-hmm.
integrate them and welcome them into your life and see them clearly and sit with them, that there are great powers that reside within. And then you have the opportunity to meld that with your other innate gifts. And then here
Mm-hmm.
you are walking the path, and it's not anyone else's path. It is exactly yours.
Absolutely. And thanks for adding that. Yes, and that's what that healing is, right? It's the power of alchemy.
Mhm.
It's the power of again welcoming everything in because everything belongs, right? And allowing it to transform into what exactly it knows it needs to be.
Mhm.
And like you said, was very important. It translates those codes from the wound into the power of the wound, right? Within our deepest wounds, we'll find our most powerful medicine.
Mhm.
And again, we live in sort of a strange time where um, wounds are things that are sort of seen as separate from us in a way, or we overly identify with them. And when really they're sort of as simple, it's almost just like quantum physics, right? It's like you just take something in one form and you alchemize it, and then it becomes a different form.
Mhm.
And that's kind of all it is,
Mhm.
right? And like I said, these wounds are in service of us. They're in service to us and to what we need to be learning and transforming and alchemizing to be of service on earth right now to this world. And
Mm.
my wounds, my wounds certainly have informed my medicine. I mean, we speak about belonging, and you heard a little bit about my life. I don't belong anywhere,
Mm.
right? Like I'm I'm Russian, but I'm not quite Russian. I'm American, but not really American. I also lived in the UK, not British. I'm Jewish, but we're from all over. So it's like I live in Nicaragua. I've never lived in the place of my birth. And I everywhere I went, I never belonged anywhere, right? I was always that other girl, and um, that was a big wound for me,
Mm.
right? That was massive. This pain of feeling like I just can't possibly belong, and no matter where I go or where I look, but I was given a gift with that as well, right?
Mm.
And the gift was because I never had the experience of having the illusion of belonging somewhere, right? Like I belong to a nation, or I belong to a religion, or I belong to a town. It was a lot easier for me to let those things kind of go, if
Mm.
that makes and
Yeah.
be like, has to be a deeper belonging here. And that was a big power, meaning like an empowering force on my journey
Mm.
of the root of what is belonging actually, right? And it was through my own journey and alchemizing a lot of these wounds around belonging that I was able to come to that source of, oh, it's here, right? It's here and it's now and it's all around us. And I actually just get to choose to belong here. No one is going to give me permission to belong, right? I do belong, and it's up to me to be able to claim it or just continue my little wounded journey to try to find it somewhere outside of myself, which
Mhm.
again goes back to that sovereignty,
Mhm.
right? I can be in my sovereignty in relationship to this earth and this life, and I get to choose to remember the inherent truth of my belonging.
Mhm. Yeah.
Uh, and leave the story behind, right? Because the story serves us until it begins to imprison us, and when we alchemize the story, it becomes medicine.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that people like you and I, who have been wanderers of sorts, that we can sometimes forget that the earth has been wandering all over itself forever.
Hmm.
That there's an inherent power in taking up that kind of archetypal role of being a wanderer or a wanderer or an edge walker, and that by living through the inevitable wounds that come with being such a wanderer or edge walker, that then we dig into latent powers that exist there that allow us to then dip back in to certain places and structures and peoples, and give of ourselves and take that active stance of belonging when the time is right. And
Absolutely.
that may be part of our life, that there is that ebbing and flowing of feeling a belonging, at least to human communities. And so then it becomes ever more important to deepen our connection with the living animate earth, of which
Hmm.
we're inextricably embedded within. Yeah.
Absolutely. And this is why I tell people, like, my answer to most questions with people is lay deeper roots.
Mm.
Right? People come to me, Elena, the astrology is killing me, or the election, or this, or that, or my parents, or I'm like, lay deeper roots,
I love that.
right? That's it, right? Like, or I'm at rock bottom. I'm like, you're at rock bottom? Great. Lay roots at rock bottom. There's only one way up,
Mm.
right? And so it's just, remembering that wherever we wander, it's like just lay roots.
Mm.
right? And you know, lay roots as we go and connect to our roots as we go, and just connect to that inherent beingness of being a human on this earth wherever we go. I personally believe, and this is a big feature in my work as well, that wandering is a very important stage of the evolution of a human soul in one's lifetime. And wandering can be what you and I have done, which is leaving where you come from and traveling. But wandering can also take different shapes and forms in people's lives. And I think the essential definition, or the structures that need to happen for wandering of the soul to really take place, is, can I remove myself from the context that has defined me since I was a child? Right? Can I remove myself from the structures, the context? Because up until that point, we're always understanding ourselves from within like a construct that's not necessarily ours, right? It's not, it was given to us, or we were put into it, right? But it's not necessarily who we are. And so the wanderer is a super important phase of one's soul's journey, because it's when we choose, whether consciously or the soul chooses for us, and we just have to go, which I think happens more often than not with people, is we need to remove ourselves from the context of which we come from to really understand who we are. And then when we can really begin to understand who we are, and we can see ourselves reflected in the universal truths all around us, outside of that context from which we come from, then we're able to return to a new context, right? Whether it's one that we create or whether we go back to where we come from. And like you said, it's from there that we're able to serve, in a sense, right? To be of service of what we've learned in those wandering years. And what happens when we drop the context of where we come from is, like you said, all of these things kind of start to bubble to the surface, where we can no longer sort of mechanically move through our life from our wounded patterns and ways of trying to control our world or ourselves or our surroundings, or the ways that we manipulate our reality to serve our wounded places, right? Like, I'm not loved, or I'm not good enough, or I'm not seen, or I'm not worthy, or I'm not valued, or I don't belong here. And so when we leave the context, it's like all those mechanisms of control or manipulation begin to fall away, and we're actually just faced with what's at the root of all those things. Right? Which is, like, wow, this is why I'm like this with women, or this is why I can't commit, or, this is why I feel like this about my mom, or this is, it's like suddenly all these core wounds begin to show themselves and begin to bubble up because we've given them space outside of context. And that's that really fertile space within which we can really meet these things with the light of our own consciousness and with our heart, and touch them and allow them to alchemize. And like you said, they're going to translate those imprints into something that is more in service of evolution, right? Which is our gifts and our medicine. And so when we come back, whatever coming back means, but we have to come back. I have to say this because I've worked with so many people who refuse to come back. And I'm like, guys, you have to come. The world needs you. Please show up, because I don't need more people like living in a sarong or a dishcloth in the Himalayas in India who refuse to leave because they want to do more self-work. I need you to go to your law office or your family or your yoga studio or your bakery or wherever you come from, and I need you to bring that into the reality, because that's service. right? And it doesn't have to be, this gets me started on a whole other thing. It doesn't mean that you're all healers and you're all shamans and you're all yogis. It just means you're a human with a gift. And we don't need the whole world to be 100% population of shamans and healers. We need people who have touched the pain, who have alchemized the pain, who know themselves, who are rooted in the earth, who are in service to life, to be lawyers, to be doctors, to be construction workers, to be mothers, right? To be caretakers, to be bakers, to be teachers, right? To be farmers. We need these people returning into society and the world, bringing their gifts with them and just dripping a little bit of their magic on everything that they do. Because that's how we're anchoring in truth and life and evolution into this reality, right? And, it never happens. I've never seen it happen because this is not how evolution works. But we don't need people to go back to their 9 to 5 and like shut down again. It's impossible. It can't happen. But I need people who have touched that peace within themselves to go out there and live from it, because by living from it, you're actually going to ripple out and it's going to touch that peace in other people. And then they're going to be like, oh, right? And something clicks on. Because this is life, right? Life is always in multiplication of its own evolution. It's like the universe is always expanding, right? These are these organic mechanisms that we can insert ourselves into, meaning we can remember that we're already part of them and begin to take an active engagement and relationship with them. Or we can go back to like Netflix and 9 to 5 until the end of time and let the world
Alena, this has been truly wonderful. Thank you for taking time out of your morning to be with me, to be with us in this way. It's been really heartwarming and inspiring and grounding. I think we need to wrap it up now. Is there anything that you want to say as a way to tie all this up?
I feel like I've said a lot of things, and thank you for having me and for asking such important questions and for giving me the space to share. I just, the message that, I always want to leave people with is just, just remember who you are, right? Like who you are in relationship to earth, to nature, go outside, right? That's the most important spiritual practice that we can do, really, I think. And, and it'll all come from there, right? When we can remember who we are in this web of life and begin to act within it, it's like, that's where we're going to find everything that we think we're looking for. But it's here and it's now. We just, need to remember it.